Ford says some drivers have reported dashboard screens going completely blank when starting the vehicle. No crashes or injuries have been linked.
Ford just shattered the all-time recall record with 116 recalls. While customers wait over a year for repairs, the Ford family is draining billions in dividends. Ford's bankruptcy risk score has fallen into critical territory as recalls explode. Parts and mechanics run short, and cash flows to shareholders instead of fixes, pushing the system toward failure. Let's expose what's really happening. The recall apocalypse. A deep dive into the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration recall database was expected to put Tesla at the top. Instead, the result was shocking. Ford Motor Company didn't just lead the industry in recalls, it obliterated the record. In just 9 months, Ford issued 116 recalls, more than the next 10 automakers combined. For context, BMW had 10, Hyundai 12, International Motors 13, Honda and Mercedes 16 each, General Motors 18, Volkswagen 20, Forest River 28, and Stellantis 32. Tesla, just 7 recalls, below the industry average. Ford alone exceeded all other regular automakers in the top 10 combined. The historical comparison is staggering. GM's 2014 ignition switch crisis, which killed 100-plus people, set a record with 77 recalls. That record stood for a decade. Ford blew past it by 45%. So far, Ford has recalled 9.5 million vehicles, nearly matching its global sales over the last 2 years. These aren't minor issues: brake failures, vehicle fires, dark instrument panels and highway speeds, and airbag defects. Even worse, 26 recalls were re-recalls, failed fixes needing another fix. Those alone exceeded nearly every other automaker's total. When one company accounts for 38% of all industry safety actions, it's no longer building cars, it's running a repair operation. The customer nightmare. So Ford issues a recall and a truck is affected. The owner calls the dealer, books an appointment, and expects a fix. Simple? Not even close. Here's what makes this crisis even worse. Ford CEO Jim Farley recently admitted on Yahoo Finance and the Office Hours podcast that across all Ford dealerships in America, there are 6,000 empty service bays right now. That's 6,000 bays with lifts and tools, but no mechanics to work in them. Farley himself said, "As of this morning, we had 5,000 openings. A bay with a lift and tools and no one to work in it." This means that even when your Ford finally gets to the dealership, there may be nobody there to fix it. Not because of part shortages, not because the repair is too complex, but because there's literally no mechanic available. Meet Josh, a farmer from Stony Ridge. After years of waiting, he finally bought his dream truck, a used Ford Raptor from a family member, still under warranty. 9 weeks later, the truck was still sitting at the dealership with no clear timeline for repair. His frustration boiled over. "Ford Motor Company, you have lost my respect. You have lost my business forever." Josh scheduled his appointment for September 18th and dropped the truck off on Sunday. He was told it would be inspected Monday morning and that he'd receive a call. No call came. When he followed up Thursday, the explanation was shocking. "Sir, we just haven't had a lift available to get your vehicle on." The dealership had rows of lifts. They just weren't prioritizing warranty work. Once the truck was finally inspected, multiple issues were found. Then came the real problem. The service representative explained there were 20 or more vehicles on the lot waiting for the same parts, and Ford had no estimated delivery date. Why wouldn't Ford know when its own parts would arrive? Because, as the dealer explained, many parts are made by outside contractors, not Ford itself. Those suppliers also serve other automakers and prioritize new production over Ford's recall emergencies. Parts for Josh's 2017 Raptor took 1 to 4 weeks each to arrive. This crisis is compounded by a massive technician shortage that even Ford's CEO can't ignore. 82% of U.S. auto shops are affected, with 46% significantly impacted. Farley claims these mechanic positions pay up to $120,000 a year, nearly double the U.S. median income. Yet, the bays remain empty. Why? Because the real story behind the mechanic shortage is far more damaging than Ford wants to admit. Check out my recent video about this problem. The link's in the description below. Even Ford acknowledges the problem, offering $5,000 scholarships to auto students through Ford Philanthropy, not as charity, but out of necessity. And even when parts and technicians are available, many dealers avoid recall work altogether. Quick oil changes pay far more than complex warranty repairs reimbursed at reduced rates. The result is a perfect storm. Reluctant dealers, missing parts, too few technicians, and an explosion of recalls. For owners like Josh, the cost isn't just inconvenience. It's lost income, stalled livelihoods, and mounting debt. The bitter irony? While customers wait months for repairs, Ford Motor Company continues producing new vehicles with the same defects. Ford's own quality chief admitted in 2022 that recall repairs can take months or even more than a year. That was with 67 recalls. Today, that number has more than doubled. The experience purge. So how did Ford Motor Company fall this far? Critics point to one core issue: the experience gap. Under MBA-style cost-cutting, engineers were treated as expenses. If one cost more, they were cut. In recent years, Ford systematically pushed out its most experienced engineers, moves later confirmed by multiple age discrimination lawsuits. Court documents showed Ford hired Boston Consulting Group to build an algorithm flagging employees by birth date and years of service. In plain terms, workers were targeted for age and experience. Engineers with spotless records and decades of awards were suddenly too close to retirement. These weren't weak performers, they were Ford's institutional memory. Engineers with 30-plus years of experience who understood entire vehicle systems and knew how small design changes could cause major failures years later. As one F-150 owning analyst put it, older engines were replaced by younger ones, and now the same mistakes are being repeated. That's how $100,000 SUVs end up catching fire. Replacing a 30-year veteran with a new graduate doesn't just cut payroll. It erases supplier history, past defect knowledge, and real-world lessons that never appear in simulations. New engineers may master CAD, but they don't know which parts failed 4 years ago. Ford once relied on experience to prevent repeat failures. Then it removed that experience and offshored much of the work, compounding the damage. The recall surge isn't bad luck, it's on-the-job learning with customers paying the price. Engineered in Mexico. If firing experienced engineers wasn't damaging enough, the next phase of Ford's strategy accelerated the problem. Ford Motor Company's Global Technology and Business Center in Mexico is no longer a support operation. It has become one of Ford's most critical engineering hubs worldwide, second only to Dearborn. Between 2010 and 2022, Ford's engineering operations in Mexico expanded by 900%, while thousands of white-collar engineering jobs were eliminated in the United States. In 2020, American engineers made up 70 to 80% of Ford's global engineering workforce. 5 years later, that share fell to 55 to 60%, while Mexico's portion nearly doubled to almost 15%. The shift is most dramatic in electric vehicles. U.S. involvement dropped from 80 to 85% to 45 to 55%, with Mexico now co-leading North American EV development, including its own battery lab and validation facilities. Mexican teams are no longer just supporting projects, they are designing vehicles. More than 70% of the Bronco Sport was engineered in Mexico. The Mustang Mach-E relied heavily on Mexican engineers for battery pack systems and electrical validation. 9 Mexican engineers worked on instrument panels for the 2022 Expedition and F-150 Lightning. Parts later recalled after failures caused displays to go dark while driving. Ford publicly celebrates this shift. Ford Mexico's product development directors stated they are equally or more valuable than engineers in the US, Germany, or Australia. In April 2022, Ford cut 580 engineering jobs in Detroit. CEO Jim Farley said Ford had too many people in certain places. Less than a month later, Ford added 500 engineering positions in Brazil. This is not about the talent of Mexican or Brazilian engineers. The issue is institutional knowledge. Engineering depends on decades of accumulated experience, supplier history, manufacturing realities, and real-world failure patterns. When 70% of a vehicle's engineering moves overseas, those networks fracture. The results show up in recalls. In 2025, just 9 months in, the Bronco Sport logged 8 recalls, Mach-E 7, F-150 Lightning 6, and Expedition 13. Yet Ford continues marketing itself as all in on America. When core engineering is outsourced and Detroit teams are dismantled, that slogan stops being pride and starts looking like deception. Follow the money. A recent analysis by Jonathan Weil of the Wall Street Journal, famous for flagging Enron early, exposed troubling math at Ford. Ford reported just 11 cents in EPS, yet paid nearly 4 times that in cash dividends. Even worse, it's on track to pay 75 cents per share in dividends against analysts' 78-cent earnings estimate. That's not prudence, it's extraction. How does Ford justify it? A custom metric called adjusted free cash flow. Essentially cash flow before the bad stuff. It excludes $529 million in severance, $515 million in pension contributions, and $285 million in other outflows. Strip those out and the cash looks real. In reality, Ford paid out about $500 million more than it generated. Put simply, Ford cut experienced U.S. engineers, replaced them with cheaper overseas labor, and drained reserves to fund dividends, while excluding layoff costs so payouts stayed intact. That's a classic death spiral playbook. Who benefits? The Ford family collected $55 million plus in dividends last year. Though they own just 2% of shares via Class B stock, they control 40% of voting power, deciding leadership, strategy, and pay. Chairman Bill Ford Jr. reportedly earns about $17 million per year. When 2% controls 98%, it's not a democracy, it's a monarchy focused on keeping the cash flowing. If you're finding this information helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. The debt bomb. Ford Motor Company is carrying roughly $160 billion in total debt, most of it tied to leases and loans, with about 80% backed by vehicles themselves as collateral. That structure becomes dangerous when vehicle values soften or defaults rise. To keep sales moving, especially for the F-150, Ford Credit has begun offering lower interest rates to subprime borrowers, including buyers with FICO scores below 620. These customers typically face rates near 16%, but Ford is cutting rates to boost affordability. The pattern is familiar, and history shows where widespread subprime lending can lead. This shift comes as the auto loan market is seeing the highest level of 90-plus day delinquencies since the COVID lockdowns, with defaults climbing across the industry. Financial pressure is already visible. Ford's 2024 EBIT was $10.2 billion, yet roughly $10 billion went straight to debt service. Another $7.8 billion was consumed by warranty and recall costs, leaving margins effectively erased. By comparison, General Motors spent under $5 billion on recalls and warranty, while Toyota Motor Corporation spent about $3 billion. Ford's recall costs are expected to rise sharply this year after recalls more than doubled. One Bronco Sport fuel leak recall alone exceeded $500 million, and it's just one of 112 total recalls, not counting non-safety warranty work. The Altman Z-score, a long-standing bankruptcy risk model, flags scores below 1.81 as high risk. Ford's score has fallen to around 1.0, indicating severe financial distress. Companies rarely recover from this level. Despite that, Ford continues paying shareholders more than it earns, suggesting value extraction, not recovery, has become the priority. The GM playbook. This pattern should feel familiar because it has played out before. In the years leading up to the 2008 financial crisis, General Motors drained itself by paying shareholders $36 billion in dividends. Had that cash been retained, GM might have survived the crash. Instead, it collapsed and U.S. taxpayers stepped in with over $50 billion in bailout funds. At the time, Ford Motor Company took the opposite approach. Ford stockpiled cash, sacrificed dividends, and survived without a bailout. Shareholders absorbed the pain, but the company lived. What Ford observed afterward was unsettling. GM shareholders kept the money they extracted, while GM's debt was effectively transferred to taxpayers. Ford, meanwhile, kept the debt it took on to stay alive, and GM continued operating under largely the same leadership. That lesson appears to have reshaped Ford's priorities. Today, Ford faces a perfect storm. Record recalls, exploding warranty costs, massive debt tied to subprime lending, and the enormous capital demands of the EV transition, while shareholders are still paid first. Ford has borrowed $9.6 billion through a Department of Energy loan program, even as dividends continue. Meanwhile, commitments tied to that support are slipping. The Super Duty EV plant in Tennessee moved from 2025 to 2028. Battery plants are delayed and major projects face uncertainty. The contrast with Tesla is stark. Tesla pays no dividends, conducts no buybacks, and reinvests aggressively in factories, technology, and quality. Ford chose dividends over engineers, and that choice carries consequences. The tariff illusion. Under USMCA, vehicles with 75% regional content from the US, Mexico, or Canada face no tariffs. Ford's Mexican-built models, the Maverick, Bronco Sport, and Mach-E, exceed 80% regional value, making them fully exempt. Current tariffs simply don't apply. Even if tariffs did push some reshoring, what would return is mostly assembly work. The higher value engineering and design roles have already been offshored, and tariffs don't touch those jobs. For decades, the U.S. kept the brains at home and outsourced the hands. Now that pyramid is inverted. When CEO Jim Farley was asked about bringing Maverick production back, the only concrete detail was cost. The price would rise above $30,000. Translation: no reshoring. Notably, no one is even asking about bringing engineering jobs back. The Tesla contrast. The contrast with Tesla explains a lot of what's going wrong at Ford Motor Company. Many expected Tesla to dominate recall rankings. Instead, Tesla logged just 7 recalls, well below average. More important is the trend. 20 recalls in 2022, 14 in 2023, 16 in 2024, and on pace for about 10 in 2025. Ford went the opposite direction, from 67 recalls to more than 160. How recalls are handled matters even more. Tesla owners often wake up to a phone notification, install an over-the-air update, and move on. No dealer visit, no waiting months. Ford owners can wait weeks or months for parts and repairs. The difference is structural. Tesla builds software-defined vehicles with centralized systems that can be patched remotely. Ford relies on hundreds of supplier-controlled modules. Tesla is vertically integrated, making key components in-house, while Ford depends on suppliers serving multiple automakers. Tesla runs its own service network and uses real-time fleet data to catch problems early. At a deeper level, Tesla is engineering-led. Elon Musk emphasizes technical decisions. Tesla pays no dividends, reinvesting everything, and ranks among the highest made-in-America content. Ford treats engineering as a cost center, cutting Detroit teams, shifting 70% of Bronco Sport engineering to Mexico, and prioritizing dividends. The result is clear. Tesla recalls fall as volume grows. Ford's explodes. Tesla acts like a tech company that builds cars. Ford acts like a financial company that assembles them. The coming collapse. Ford Motor Company once marketed itself with the slogan, "Quality is job one." With 116 recalls and counting, quality now looks closer to job zero. Ford is facing a perfect storm. Record recalls with no sign of slowing. Warranty costs that have tripled the industry average. Roughly $160 billion in total debt, increasingly tied to subprime auto loans as defaults rise. And the enormous capital demands of the EV transition. All of this is unfolding while the Ford family continues extracting value through dividends that exceed earnings. In calm conditions, Ford might limp along, but a single shock, an economic downturn, supply chain disruption, or the arrival of affordable Chinese EVs could expose how thin its margins really are. An Altman Z-score near 1.0 isn't just a caution sign. It signals severe financial distress, a level from which companies rarely recover. This has implications beyond Ford shareholders. The company has already borrowed $9.6 billion through the Department of Energy loan program. If Ford fails, that obligation doesn't vanish. It shifts to taxpayers, echoing the General Motors bailout. Former Ford executive Bob Lutz once warned that companies thrive when led by people who understand the product. Engineering-led firms outperform analysis-driven bureaucracies. Boeing is the cautionary tale. Ford increasingly looks determined to follow it. Ford's Altman Z-score signals severe bankruptcy risk. The Ford family is extracting maximum value while the ship sinks. And with $9.6 billion in taxpayer loans already on the books, we know who'll pay when Ford collapses. The question isn't if, it's when. And if you found this information helpful, smash that like button and subscribe for more auto content. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.